She was a talented actress and singer in her sophomore year of college, and she had just met the man of her dreams. She had a great group of friends and a fun college job. They say that nothing good happens after midnight, and for Melanie Goodwin, she ran into a monster who proved that statement to be true. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kimberlea. If you've never been here before, nice to finally meet you. And if you have been here before, you would know how important my sponsors are to the continued ability for me to make videos on this channel, which I am so passionate and I love to do. So today, before we get into the video, I do want to thank our sponsor. And that is one of our most loyal sponsors on this channel, PDS Debt. The holidays are here, and that's a good thing, but also a stressful time. And one of the most stressful things about it can be, and has been for me personally, debt. I know that I wanted to know a better solution to paying off my debt, and I wonder if any of you are like me and thinking the same thing. Our loyal sponsor, PDS Debt, has a solution that's worked for me, and that's why I want to share. They have customized zero interest options for anyone that's struggling with credit cards, personal loans, collections, or medical bills. With inflation on the rise and the holidays here and gas prices hitting all-time highs, now is the time to get serious about a better plan to pay off your debt. Sadly, it looks like inflation is here to stay, and the cost of living is getting higher and higher. I should know I'm about to move from where I am in with my boyfriend. The programs from PDS Debt make a real difference in your life day to day by saving you money the same day that you get started with PDS Debt. And they're giving qualified viewers a free debt savings analysis just for completing the 30-second online debt assessment at pdsdebt.com/Kim. You will receive a full breakdown on how to save on interest each month and the quickest way to take care of your debt. If you're making payments every month on your debt and your balances aren't going down, this program is for you. PDS Debt rolls all of your payments into one low zero-interest monthly payment. The good thing is that everyone with over $10,000 or more in debt qualifies, and there is no minimum credit score required. Bad credit and fair credit are accepted. You can save thousands in interest and fees and pay off your debt in a fraction of the time. So go to pdsdebt.com/Kim and get your quick and easy debt assessment. That's pdsdebt.com/Kim. Take back your financial freedom by visiting pdsdebt.com/Kim today. And thanks to PDS Debt for being a long-standing loyal sponsor for this channel. Today I have the absolute pleasure of introducing you to Melanie Goodwin. Melanie Therese Goodwin was born in Arlington, Texas, just a little after midnight on August 4th, 1988, to mother Peggy and father Glenn Goodwin. Melanie was the Goodwins' third child. They had an older daughter, Candace, and a son, Glenn David, named after his father. Peggy said that God gave them a beautiful gift with the birth of Melanie. She said they were blessed by her presence, and she made their family complete. The Goodwins were a Christian family, and they raised their children with the values that they held near and dear to their hearts. And I swear this is relevant, but I saw a meme the other day, and I'm going to put it up on the screen. It says, if you watch any Dateline episode, you learn real quick. There's nothing more dangerous than lighting up a room. It's on every episode. That's why I don't light up anything. I make places worse when I get there. I know this is supposed to be funny, and it is. And I think that there is a place for humor even in the most horrifying and devastating circumstances. But in my videos, I really try hard to stick to the seriousness of these situations. However, what makes that meme funny is that it's true. We do tend to use certain phrases when we describe the people we have lost. We hear the same ones over and over, with a common one being that they were someone who would light up a room, or that their laugh was infectious. Another one is to know them was to love them, and maybe it's true, or maybe we look for the best in our loved ones when something terrible happens to them, and we want them to be remembered for the positive things about them. I think we all know that no one is perfect, but for Melanie Goodwin, she was close to it, at least in the eyes of those closest to her. When I do these cases, I really try to get an understanding of the people I talk about. One of the best ways is to look on Facebook. That's my go-to place to really learn as much as I can. One person said, Melanie was like a shooting star that even though just for a moment could light up the darkest of the night sky. I was intrigued as soon as I saw her beautiful face and read so many amazing things about her. What I gathered about Melanie and her family is that they were very devoted Christians. They loved the Lord and dedicated all they did in his honor. The Goodwin family was very close. Candace and Glenn David adored their little sister. She was the baby of the family. She was Daddy's little girl. And she was referred to as her mommy's tiny girl. She was always petite. So small, actually, that her wrists were so very tiny that her brother could hold them both in his one hand when he tickled her. And as Christians, the Goodwins believed in God and that God gave them their talents. And we can never be sure if it's nature or nurture, but in some cases, when it comes to something like singing, that is usually nature. And Melanie had a great singing voice. And as a child, she would constantly be entertaining her family and friends. She was naturally social and had a knack for making people laugh. She was also wise beyond her years, according to her mother. This natural characteristic made it easy for her to step into the shoes of other people, especially when it came to acting. Melanie was a natural-born actress. At the age of only 2, she would be making faces in front of the mirror and just entertaining herself for hours. So her mother knew that this was a talent they should cultivate, especially for the glory of God, who they believed bestowed this gift upon Melanie. That being said, they signed her up for voice lessons and theater classes when she was around the 3rd grade. Melanie honed in on her passion by playing pretend with her best friend. Her name was Demaya Pridgeon, and they were always there to practice together. They had a vivid imagination, and they loved to sing and dance and just laugh together. It wasn't long before Melanie was doing live shows at the local theater. One of the first ones she participated in was Cats and Frosty the Snowman. In that one, Melanie played a snowflake. Theater became a huge passion for her, and it was something her family was very supportive of as well. And her singing in the church choir was another one of her passions. Melanie's father never missed one of her performances. His personal favorite was when she played the fairy godmother in Cinderella. He just thought that she was the most beautiful fairy. When she walked out on stage with her scepter and crown, the crowd was actually speechless. You could hear the gasp from the audience. They were just in awe of her. And her dad was so proud, so very proud, to call Melanie his daughter. Melanie was a member of Theater Arlington. It's been in operation for almost 50 years now, and it is in the heart of Arlington, Texas. Kids can start lessons at as early as 3 years old, and Theater Arlington is where most of Melanie's closest friendships were formed with her theater family. But she also dedicated a lot of her time to her high school theater group at Bowie High School. She played the lead in many of their productions. To give you an example of her personality, she was not the shy one in her group of friends. She would go off campus for lunch, and when she got into her car, she would sing at the top of her lungs to Wicked. She was a mixture of fun and sophistication. People looked up to her. And to me, I don't know, I can just tell that she's just a sweet person. She radiates innocence and fun. It wasn't hard to like Melanie. She made things enjoyable and fun. She would intern at Arlington Theater during the summer and clean the lobby and the bathrooms at the end of the day, which is normally quite a daunting task, but she knew how to instantly change that around. She would start singing Wicked or another musical sing-along, and her energy would just transform even the most mundane activity. That and her outlook on life. She was someone that remained positive through the trials and tribulations in life, and she was there to help others do the same. She loved life. She was also a good friend. She's the type of friend that wouldn't just remember your birthday, but she would call you and she would sing happy birthday to you. She loved making other people feel special, and she would not hesitate to attribute all of it to her faith. Not only did people look up to her for her natural acting abilities, but she had impeccable style. She always looked her best, and her friends couldn't help but being just a little bit envious of how she put together the cutest outfits. Melanie was gorgeous. She had these piercing blue-green eyes I've never seen before. I mean, just look at these eyes. I achieved those eyes with contact lenses, but hers are naturally that piercing and green. She also had this beautiful chestnut-colored hair that she would sometimes put highlights in, but that smile, as they say, was so bright that it could really light up a room. It's just one of those smiles that make me smile looking at it. By the time she was graduating from high school in 2006, she had grown into a smart, funny, generous, loving, self-confident young woman. Here she is at the senior awards ceremony. Next in life was college, and she dreamed of possibly working as a news anchor one day. So she applied to the University of North Texas in Denton to study radio, television, and film in their communications department. She was accepted and started in the fall of 2006 as a communications major. This meant moving away from home. Denton is just north of Dallas and about 50 miles away from her home in Arlington, Texas. Her parents took the trip with her so that she could get settled into her dorm room her freshman year. Denton is a fun place to live, especially for a college student, because it's a college town. There's lots for you to do there and lots of people your own age. Denton was home to the Eli Young Band and Bowling for Soup. You remember them? And the university's alumni include NFL legend Mean Joe Green, Dr. Phil, probably know that one, and Norah Jones. The population at the time was about 120,000 people, but because of its nature, Denton attracted hundreds of thousands of people to the city every year for things like the North Texas State Fair and the rodeo, or the Denton Art and Jazz Festival. These events bring in people from all over the country all year round. This is where Melanie planned to call home for the next few years. She moved in with her roommate, Jacqueline Williamson, and they became good friends fast. It didn't take long for Melanie to become well known in the Denton area. Right away, she began making friends by singing in a choir for the Denton Wesley Foundation, which is a Christian student ministry affiliated with the United Methodist Church in that area. She even traveled all the way to Northern Ireland, where the group toured and performed at various churches throughout the country in May of 2007, right before her sophomore year. And it was in that sophomore year that she crossed paths with someone who would destroy everything. Melanie made friends very easily because of her bubbly personality. Her personality is what led her to finding the perfect job for her. College jobs can be a few things. They could either be serious and in furtherance of a related career path, or they can be just for fun, to pass time, and to earn some extra cash on the side. And for Melanie, her college job was more of the latter. She became a brand ambassador for Red Bull energy drink. It was full of fun and socializing, but in a way, isn't that the perfect job for a communications major? It had some real advantages that a talented and personable girl like Melanie could leverage. It put her in all sorts of different social circles. Red Bull has its hands in everything. And to be honest, hate to say it, but I always have one in my hand. It's true, especially while I'm filming. I guess I'm somewhat of a Red Bull addict, but it's the only energy drink I've ever liked, and I've been drinking it as far back as I can remember. Here's a picture of me in law school. It's pretty much what got me through all of those sleepless nights studying. And if it wasn't for what I learned, I probably wouldn't be able to research these cases the way that I do. So thank you to Red Bull for some of that. Even though it's terrible for me, I know. And you guys always tell me to stop drinking it and drink water. I will try. No promises. Red Bull promote themselves on many different forms of media, and there is no telling where a Red Bull ambassador will find themselves handing out samples and lifting the spirits of Red Bull fans. This job allowed Melanie to interact with all kinds of people and learn how to communicate in many different circumstances, even improvising the talking points that her supervisors would set out for her. It's very similar to practicing her lines for acting. It really was the perfect job for her. Even if it seemed as though it was just a fun job, Melanie was smart. She knew what she was doing, and as a sophomore at only 19 years old, studying communications at one of the top communications programs in the state, and already employed by a major brand, she was set up for success in many ways that put her ahead of girls her age. It's true that Melanie may have played fantasy characters in her plays, but she was also living quite her own fantasy in real life, especially when she met her own Prince Charming in the beginning of 2007. Her boyfriend, Jose Alejandro Valencia, he's known affectionately as Ali. He was a popular fraternity boy at UNT. He had the looks and the personality, and he had Melanie's heart. They would call each other best friends that could not get enough of one another, and they fell in love. They were inseparable. It was forever for these two. They were in it for life. Forever. They just didn't know how short forever would be for them. 8 months into their relationship in the fall of 2007, on September 24th, Ali gave Melanie a ride to the university parking lot around 4:45 p.m. to pick up her car. She was going to a dinner with her coworkers that night before they headed out to a big event they were working for Red Bull. When I say big event, it was huge for gamers across the world. Halo 3 was set to be released that night at midnight, September 25th, 2007. If you don't play video games, this may mean nothing to you, and I totally get it, but Halo 3 is a first-person shooter video game, and it was made for the Xbox 360 console. This was the third installment in the Halo series, and this game in particular concluded the story arc that began back in 2001 with the original Halo game and was continued in Halo 2 in 2004. So it was a big deal for those who wanted to know what happened in the third game. Halo 3 grossed $170 million its very first day of release, and $300 million its first week. To date, Halo 3 has sold in excess of 14.5 million copies. These releases are a big deal. There was a release party at GameStop, which is a video game store, that began that night on the 24th, and Red Bull was the sponsor. People wait in line for hours. So it makes sense for an energy drink company to be promoting its product. You need to stay up all night. And this is a perfect retailer with a perfect target audience. College students just coming back to school for the fall semester, and students that were looking forward to this release. Students who spend a lot of their nights up late playing video games and drinking energy drinks. It was being talked about on the UNT campus, and gamers were excited about the game, but also about the release party itself, because you usually win things while you wait in line. There could be a store credit, like a gift card up for grabs. If you play a Halo 2 tournament, you could get a free copy of the game, or you could win a trivia challenge and maybe get a free accessory. Melanie's job was to put Red Bull in the hands of everyone at that release party. The Red Bull models were local celebrities. They were on my college campus too. They would drive around in the Red Bull truck. I don't know if you've ever seen it. I'll put it on the screen. And they would just hand out these drinks like they were Mardi Gras beads. It was exciting, especially for the men, because let's face it, the women that were chosen to promote for a company like this as a brand ambassador were the best of the best. They were bubbly and outgoing and in shape, and they wore outfits to show all of that off. The Red Bull colors are blue and white, so that night the girls were told to wear a tight white tank top underneath a navy blue button-down shirt that Red Bull provided, and it had a logo on the sleeve. The girls wore it with most of the buttons opened at the chest area, and they paired it with jean skirts. I was able to find a few pictures, they're not that great, of this night, and this is Melanie with one of the other Red Bull ambassadors. The release itself didn't happen till midnight, so this event went on until after 1 a.m. After the event was over, the plan was for Melanie to go back to her boyfriend's to his on-campus apartment. It's obvious that she made it to the event, since we just looked at pictures of her handing out drinks and smiling and having a great time. But what happened after this remained a mystery by the time the sun came up. On the morning of September 25th, 2007, a 911 call comes in from a man who works at a company called TransTech. It's out in Carrollton, Texas, which is about 30 minutes south of Denton. He's standing in the parking lot telling the dispatcher that there is a deceased female's body in the grassy area behind the building. Even the dispatcher, who takes calls all day long, had to ask the caller to clarify what he was saying. His exact words were, "Ma'am, there is a burnt female body over here." The dispatcher told him not to touch anything, and he was like, "Oh, I'm not going to touch anything." And she said she wanted everyone to stay away from that area and let the police handle it, and authorities were sent out there immediately, including homicide detective Greg Frade from the Carrollton Police Department, who took the lead on this case. Now, this area is clearly not the same as it was back in 2007. I pulled up this location on Google Maps. It used to have a lot of bushes and trees in between TransTech and this new organization that was built right next to it. Before, this was a lot more desolate. If you don't know by now, I'm an overly detail-obsessed person, and I was able to pinpoint exactly where the body was found. Of course, there was an address that I had located on a report of 3220 Keller Springs Road, but I wanted to know more. I used pictures that you will see in just a moment and other evidence to pinpoint where the body actually was. And to my surprise, it was found right when you come into this parking lot. I assumed it would be much further back, like towards the way back around the corner. No. And I will show you later how I know that this is where the body was found. But when you come into this parking lot in 2022, there are no trees here anymore. However, back in 2007, there were. While investigating this on Google Maps, I was shocked when I tried to click in this area and boom, it took me right back to image capture from 2018 and all of the bushes and the trees reappeared. I love when things like this happen. This is what it looked like when the body was found, except there was also a large embankment that sloped down a deep ditch area. But at the very least, I'm able to show you a similar view of what the tree line looked like back then. You can see here how dense these trees are. And this is the exact area where the body was found. But of course, in a downward slope that we can no longer see because it had been filled in. However, it was right on this line between where the cement is in the parking lot. So you pull your car up and look down into this grassy area, and you could see what that man who called the dispatcher was seeing. And this tree right here marks the exact spot next to where the body was. This was a very shocking discovery. I mean, it would be anyway, but for something to be so visible is very shocking. It's not something you imagine seeing when you're pulling into work on a Tuesday morning. This is what Detective Frade saw when he arrived on the scene at 11 a.m. Unfortunately, there wasn't much for detectives to go off of. It was clear that they were looking at a deceased female, but she was burned beyond recognition. They assumed it was a female because she had long hair and French nails. They could also see some clothing, some artifacts like a belt, which you can actually see in this photo that I'm showing you on the screen. But sadly, as far as the body was concerned as a whole, it was there, but what was left was not recognizable. They could not identify who the body belonged to. The person who left this body here most likely assumed they wouldn't be seen leaving it behind because of the fact it was in this wooded type area off this road in a location where businesses were not open at the time. However, this is a tech company. And not only did they have a surveillance system, but it was a pretty advanced system. They had cameras all over this parking lot. And when they looked up at the building, they could see a camera that was facing this area. So investigators knew what their next step was. They had to get that footage. But while they were in the process of subpoenas and the appropriate paperwork to get access to that surveillance footage, Detective Frade was analyzing this crime scene, and he thought he might be dealing with a serial killer. And that was because of the way the body was positioned. Her legs were facing the parking lot and bent at the knees. To him, it was quite suggestive, and he thought that the killer might be sending a message. It was so close to where you would park your car. The investigators are combing this entire area, trying to find even the smallest clue. And they were able to locate a ring, and it had an inscription on it, as well as some other articles of clothing that we will talk about more in just a second. But this surveillance footage was very important. And I'm going to tell you something that I don't usually say in these cases, but this case was pretty much solved within the first 24 hours because of technology. And I can't wait to explain how all of this came together and how amazing the detective work was. And that's why they were able to find out who did this in such a short amount of time. But it didn't mean that this case was closed just because they knew what happened. That was going to take a while and a lot more effort. Within an hour, they get a hold of that surveillance video. Now, if you've watched my videos before, you know I always complain about the quality of surveillance footage. I just do not understand why we still do not have a clear image of what's going on these video cameras. But in this case, the footage was pretty good. And we're going to see some more footage that's even better. But when detectives received the surveillance footage, they were able to get a good enough quality video. They were able to understand how this person's body ended up in this ditch. They could clearly see somebody pull a vehicle into the parking lot. I'm showing as much as I can up on the screen. They park it right here where I'm showing you near this tree that I showed you earlier. Now remember when I told you that I knew that this was the exact area? Well, that's because of this surveillance footage. I was able to pinpoint this lamppost There was only one of those in this parking lot. I was also looking at the parking spots themselves, and there were handicapped areas right here. You can see the white stripes here on the surveillance video, and I was able to pinpoint that exact location right here, right in the front of TransTech. Here are the handicapped parking spots. Here is the lamppost. And as you can see now in 2022, there are no trees there. So of course I was a little bit confused at first, but as I moved forward with my cursor, I jumped back in time. And now we are in 2018, the way it looked, and there is the lamppost. And as I turn, you can see this is the tree right here where that vehicle was parked. In the video, someone gets out of the driver's side. They walk around to the passenger side, and this is absolutely chilling. To see this play out is horrifying. Even though we have this black and white footage and it's grainy, you know what's happening here. And to a trained detective that's been doing this for 23 years, like Detective Frade, it was obvious to him that this was a male subject. And he sees him going to the passenger side. He said he could tell by the clothing and the stature, and he's done this such a long time, even the height of the individual. But what they were wearing looked like a white short sleeve shirt and long jean shorts. He opened the passenger side, removed the individual's body from that area of the vehicle, and you actually see him dragging this body across the pavement and into that grassy area that I showed you earlier. She's then dropped into that ditch, and then he makes his way back to the car to retrieve something, and then back to that area where the body was. But what you see next is just incredibly horrifying, because at that moment, he was setting a person on fire. On this video, all of a sudden, the entire screen lights up. There is just this huge explosion on camera. It's actually a surprise that this individual did not get burned, because you can see just how large this explosion was. But right afterward, you see this person, and he's running away from the fire and getting back inside that driver's side of that vehicle while this fire still rages on. And he just pulls backward and drives out of that parking lot. The timestamp on this video was 4:06 a.m. Unfortunately, as per usual, the video is not going to have the quality where you can see a person's facial features or who they are or anything that can identify them, either of them, the person who was brought to the ditch or the person who did this. But as I said, the detective could tell that he was wearing a short sleeve white shirt and jean shorts that were about past his knees. But there was something that investigators did have that they could go on, and that was the vehicle, because every vehicle has a style, make, and model, and there's different things that are very specific to a certain type of vehicle, like different lights and the positions of those lights and different body styles. They were able to pinpoint that this was a Saturn. Now, they couldn't tell what color it was because, as I said, black and white footage, but they were able to enhance the video enough to ascertain that the vehicle and the way the lights were positioned was indeed a Saturn. They were confident about that, but they didn't have much else. Like, they didn't have a license plate number or anything like that to go on. But because we do have technology, they do have the ability to search whether a Saturn anywhere in the area was reported by officers, like being involved in a crime or other situations. If there was a Saturn in the database from the night before, and to their surprise, there was a report that involved a Saturn. It was a report from 5 a.m. the same morning. An officer named Otis Koo was on patrol in the Carrollton area. He was called out to an area with a report of a lot of thefts that had been going on, and he made his way into an apartment complex. And as he's patrolling, just having the expertise and the experience, he sees something that kind of caught him off guard. It was at the back of the apartment complex, in a spot where compact cars don't usually park. It was in between these little storage units. He sees a red Saturn. It's just abandoned, but it didn't look right. And because he's investigating these thefts, he's just doing his due diligence. He goes up to the car and he checks it out. He gives it a once over. This area is usually used by oversized vehicles, so that itself was a little peculiar to see this vehicle there. And then he notices it does have a Texas plate, so that's not out of the ordinary. There wasn't any damage that he could see to the vehicle. However, as he got closer, he could smell the car. He noticed a strong scent of gasoline, and it really stood out to him.
He thought that that was definitely odd. And when he looked inside the passenger side, he saw a red gas can on the seat. And that really piqued his interest. There wasn't much else to go on other than calling this a suspicious vehicle, so that's exactly what he did. He reported a suspicious vehicle being parked in this location, and he added the make, the model, the year of the vehicle to that report. And this is the report that Detective Freyd got that morning that he's investigating this crime. The car may not have been very significant to Officer Koo when he saw it out there, but when Detective Freyd put everything together, the time frame that this vehicle was seen, the location it was in, the type of car, he didn't have a doubt. He knew that this was the car he was looking for. And this apartment complex wasn't far from the Trans Tech parking lot. So he sends officers over there. But by the time they get there, that red vehicle is gone. However, where it was parked, they find a burned sock and a gas cap to a vehicle. This is the cap that's usually over the gas tank, the one that we undo to put gas in the car. They immediately run the license plate because they need to know who this car belongs to. And they find out that the owner is back in Arlington, Texas. So at this point, they're thinking this is their prime suspect. They're going to find that driver of the vehicle because it was linked to a male's name. And they were expecting that man to answer the door when they arrived at the address, but instead, when they knocked, a woman came to the door. When the detective asked her if she knew the person who owned the red Saturn, she said, "Yes, my husband owns the vehicle, but my daughter drives it." Well, this was Melanie Goodwin's mother, Peggy. She was the one that answered the door. The car belonged to Glenn Goodwin, Melanie's father, but it was Melanie's car. Her mother and father had purchased the car for her and were paying her insurance, as many parents do. Right when Detective Freyd heard her say that the car belonged to her daughter and that her daughter was in college at UNT, red flags went up. He had done this long enough that in his heart and in his gut, which isn't accurate all the time, he just knew. He knew that he was looking at the victim's mother. It just made sense to him. Here he was expecting to find his first suspect, and now he's confronted with the fact that this is this poor girl's mother. He doesn't even have a name of the victim in his mind at this point. So he's certainly not ready to give a death notification. He doesn't have all the facts, but he is in this situation. So he just keeps asking Peggy all of the routine questions. And meanwhile, Peggy is saying things like, "Is she missing? Did you find her car?" But then he asked for a picture of her. He also talked about finding a ring. And it was just this gut feeling, a feeling that went right through Peggy Goodwin. And she just blatantly asked him, "Do you have a body?" The officer did not lie to her. He said, "We do. And we need a photograph to be able to identify or piece together what was left behind." He admitted to her that they had found the charred body of a female. He could not confirm that it was her daughter, but it was a female. Peggy went to her room to get a photograph of Melanie, and that is when she dropped to her knees and she started praying and just saying, "God, do not let this be Melanie. Do not let this be my daughter." At this moment, Detective Freyd is also realizing they have the victim's vehicle. And it made sense looking back because the car had a license plate frame that said, "Angels are watching over me." It also had this Christian symbol on the right-hand side of the trunk, a little fish with a cross in it, and a sticker on the window from Theodore Arlington. This was Melanie Goodwin's car, and someone else drove it. Someone else put her inside of it and dragged her out of it. However, Peggy knew it was her daughter because of the ring. There was a ring that was found, and it had an inscription on it. Melanie's dad and mom had given her that ring. They knew it belonged to her. So as soon as they pieced that together, they knew that their daughter was most likely the victim in this case. Her parents have said that they didn't know how to feel in this moment because they knew that she was dead. And her mother had this gut feeling that she was gone. But she didn't want to know what happened. She said she didn't want the details. And you are suspended in this timeless moment. Everything is standing still. You can't go backwards and you can't go forward. You have no answers. It's like being in purgatory. At this point, Detective Freyd is more eager than ever to find out what Melanie was doing the night that she was killed. And guess who was more than willing to help? Melanie's own mother. Peggy was a software programmer. She was very good with technology, and she offers to grab as much information as she can from the internet by getting Melanie's phone records as well as her bank statements right away to aid detectives in their investigation. And she also informed Detective Freyd that Melanie had been dating someone for the last few months, and his name was Ali Valencia. She provided all of this information to authorities. They now had to track him down and ask him when he saw Melanie last. They wanted to know if he had anything to do with this horrific crime. Detective Freyd's theory had changed from it being a possible serial killer to it being someone that Melanie may have known. Someone with access to her vehicle. Someone she trusted enough to get into her car with her. Someone like a boyfriend, perhaps. They locate Ali at his apartment and they ask him when the last time he saw Melanie Goodman was, and he looks confused and very concerned. But he fully cooperates with detectives, telling them the last time he saw her was at 4:45 p.m. the evening before, when he took her to her car in the university parking lot. He explained that he didn't hear from her again until she was done with the event, which was around 1 a.m. He said that Melanie called to check in with him and to let him know that she was on her way back to his place. Detectives want to understand the timeline here because they're a little bit confused. They wonder if Melanie ever made it back to Ali's. So they ask him, did she come home that night? And he says, I fell asleep after speaking with her, and I woke up a couple hours later in the middle of the night, and I noticed she wasn't there. But he never called the police. So detectives are wondering if this story was even true. Ali says he called her numerous times, but never got an answer. He even went out into the dorm and the university asking people if they had seen her. He said he didn't call the police because he figured there was an innocent reason as to why she hadn't shown up. But he was worried. They wanted to know the last thing he remembers Melanie telling him. And he explained that she asked him if he needed anything. And in the spur of the moment, he asked her to stop at a Quick Trip nearby. This is a convenience store, to grab him a bag of Cheetos and a chocolate milk. Melanie, being Melanie, was more than happy to make the stop and pick up some snacks for her boyfriend, so she obliged. And then he says she called him again when she was leaving the store to let him know she was checking out and that she would be over soon. Well, this store is very close by the university. I'm going to show you, and he apparently lived on campus from what I gathered. So I don't blame detectives for thinking this a little bit fishy, because he falls asleep between the time she says she's leaving the store and when. It only takes a few minutes, but it wasn't a few minutes. It was a lot longer. And this decision to ask her to get him some snacks was something that Ali would have guilt about for the rest of his life. A brief stop at the Quick Trip would be the last thing Melanie Goodwin ever did. So as usual, I went ahead and mapped these locations. Here's the GameStop, here's the Quick Trip, and here's the university. She was only minutes from getting back to Ali's apartment, as far as what we can gather from the information that was provided to the authorities. So what happened? What happened between those two locations, the Quick Trip and her boyfriend's apartment? And who was responsible? Well, at this point, they do have those phone records. Peggy Goodwin, Melanie's mom, was able to pull her phone records with a quickness because of technology being at our fingertips. So they didn't have to wait to subpoena the records from a phone company and piece all of this together. And this is why this case was being solved so fast. But in Peggy's grief and her sadness, she was still able to have the wherewithal and the willingness to help investigators piece all of this together. And when they get a hold of those records, they're able to confirm that those phone calls were made between Melanie and Ali. Now, they don't have like phone pings or anything like that. They're only looking at what they can see when you download the report from your provider online. They can just see the timestamps and the phone numbers that were incoming and outgoing. Peggy also provided Detective Freyd with Melanie's bank statements. And there was a transaction that was made at the Quick Trip in the early morning hours around 1:30 a.m. They were pressing Ali pretty hard They told him he needed to take off his shirt. They wanted to see if there were any wounds on his body. And there were none. And that's when they told him that Melanie was deceased. It was shocking. His response alone was enough to give seasoned detectives the impression that he was not involved in this crime. And I know it can be faked, and I know people react differently depending on who they are, but there was just this look, this confused look on his face, like disbelief and shock and sadness. But we know investigators still have to confirm everything. But as it stands, they need to put their suspicions on hold because they have evidence that can truly point them in the right direction. And that is the surveillance footage from the Quick Trip. Because now they know she was there and they know what time she was there. They immediately go to that location and ask for their surveillance. Now, the interesting thing about this particular location was that it was brand new and it had high-tech video surveillance systems. It was way better quality than I've seen in any of the cases that I've covered. It had at least 4 cameras that showed the inside of the entire store. And sure enough, as they're looking over that footage, they can see Melanie as clear as can be. They were 100% sure that this was her on camera. This innocent stop at a convenience store was the last place Melanie would ever be seen alive by anyone. And detectives had to know what transpired in that store. Who did she cross paths with? This was a place that university students frequented. It was a well-lit area. They see Melanie making her way into the convenience store. She goes over to several different areas, grabbing things that she needs, making her way to the refrigerator where she got that chocolate milk. It is clear to see what she's wearing. A jean skirt, a navy blue shirt with a white garment underneath, a white headband, earrings. Her hair is pulled back into a ponytail. And in this version of the surveillance footage, it looks to me like she's wearing wedges of some kind for shoes. They look like they're white in color. She also has a purse on her right arm. This convenience store is pretty much empty when they're looking at this footage. However, somebody comes through that door. And immediately, what he's wearing catches Detective Freyd's eyes. A striped white short sleeve shirt, long jean shorts, and white shoes. This immediately piques his interest because this matches what we saw in that grainy black and white surveillance video from the Transtech parking lot where that explosion happened. I'm going to show you right on the screen here. This is what he was looking at. And you can tell it's a very similar outfit. At this point, Detective Freyd is actually positive, 100% positive, that this is the man he saw driving that red Saturn into that parking lot. He's positive. He doesn't even need to see more, but of course we know they have to have all the evidence possible to connect this person to the crime. That's imperative, no matter what his gut feeling is telling him, or his experience, or even his eyes. Now, what's interesting is that they want to find out when this man first came into the store, because it looked like, as they were scrubbing through the footage before they came to Melanie, that they had seen him before. So they rewind the footage. Sure enough, he had actually been in that store for over an hour and a half before Melanie even arrived. So what is going on here? Who is this man? He's seen walking up and down different aisles, walking in the front of the store, looking outside like he's waiting for someone, then walking in and out, back and forth. He's also seen talking to the clerk. And there is a section on the video where the clerk is handing him a phone that belongs to the business, a cordless phone that he's borrowing to make some phone calls. But to who? They don't know yet. Detectives want to get a hold of the store clerk because they definitely want to know if he knew this person. Why was he letting him borrow the phone? There were other things too that the clerk was doing for him. So they had a lot of questions, and luckily they're able to get a hold of him. He goes by the name Chin. Chin explained that this guy came in, he doesn't know him, and he just kept roaming around the store, bothering him. Apparently, according to Chin, this guy didn't seem to have any money, and from what he could ascertain from listening in, and also the guy telling him, he had nowhere to go that night. He didn't have money or a ride or anything to eat. And he was calling people asking if they would come pick him up, and nobody would. So Chin kind of felt bad for the guy. He actually gave him some of his own food that he brought from home to work, and he bought him a fountain drink. and let him use the phone. But then Chin said the guy said something really weird that kind of freaked him out. He asked if he could sleep there. And Chin's like, no. Why would you need to sleep here? Like, what kind of question is that? It's a very weird question. He also said, this isn't a hotel, and you probably shouldn't be lingering around here because the police tend to be pretty active around this campus store, and they're not very nice to people who are like loitering, and that he should probably like move on. He's already given him something to eat, a drink, a phone. What else did this man expect to get from this store clerk? But the guy tells him, well, I'm not going to leave unless someone kicks me out. And he starts to confide in Chin, telling him about his life. It's nothing that Chin wanted to hear, but it's not like he could really do much. There wasn't any security there or anything to kick him out. Between customers, this man is telling Chin things like he broke his girlfriend's phone the other day and how he needs to learn how to control his temper and that he had some pending arrests and some warrants out for him. But he didn't divulge what they were for. At one point, he walks out of the store, but investigators see the moment that this guy's eyes met Melanie. He targeted Melanie. He was pacing outside the front of the store, and as soon as she walks in, he makes his way back toward the door, and it was like he made a beeline towards her. The amazing thing about this new technology was that it didn't just capture video, it captured audio. So detectives were not just able to see what was going on, but they were able to listen to the words that were exchanged between this man and Melanie herself. It was as though Melanie was helping detectives solve her own case. Well, the clerk provided them with just a little bit of a lead as to what was being said because he said he heard this man asking Melanie for a ride, and he could also hear her saying no. But of course, investigators wanted to confirm that for themselves. And they wanted to know if any other words were exchanged between the two of them. Even with it being enhanced as much as possible, you could barely make out what was being said. But detectives wouldn't give up. They listened to it again and again and again. And they were finally able to make out some of what the man was saying. He was trying to convince Melanie to give him a ride somewhere. He even said something like, you know what, just drop me off over here and I'll walk the rest of the way. And Melanie can be heard saying no repeatedly. But he kept giving her a sob story. He told her things like, my truck broke down, I would walk, but like these shoes aren't good for walking, things like that. He even said, listen, it's just up to McKinney Street, just a quarter of a mile away. But still, Melanie did the right thing to keep herself as safe as possible, and she said no. And then she does something that most of us do, or at least some of us, I know I do. When she turns her back away from this man, she gets on the phone. She lets her boyfriend know that she was on her way, and I can't know for sure whether she was hoping that this strange guy would hear her, but I know I purposely jump on the phone when I feel intimidated or scared. They even have this Citizen app now where someone can stay on the phone with you until you're home safely. Whatever the reason may have been, phone records and the footage confirm that Melanie called Ali while she was paying for the snacks, and the stranger walked out of the door. Ali said that phone call consisted of Melanie telling him she would be home soon and to please leave the door unlocked so that she could come right inside. But we know that never happened. So what happened after this call? The Quick Trip camera catches her walking out the door, but it also catches something else. The strange man. If you look to the right in the corner of the screen, just as Melanie's walking out, she's basically intercepted by the same man that was begging her for a ride inside. That is when their paths crossed. Unfortunately, there wasn't any footage available at the time about what happened after this very moment. The next time we see who detectives think is the same man is in the Transtech parking lot at 4:06 a.m. There was a gap. There were 90 minutes that were unaccounted for between this moment and the time that they know Melanie's body was set on fire. Detective Fraid needs to get the phone records from the Quick Trip. He wants to know who the stranger called. Maybe that could lead him to who the stranger was. By the next day, the autopsy was being performed. I was able to get a hold of the documents from the autopsy, and I wanted to read them to you verbatim as they were typed. This report is from the Southwestern Institute of Forensic Science in Dallas, Texas. She was found September 25th, 2007 at 11:18 a.m. She was examined September 26th at 9 a.m. She was pronounced dead at 3220 Keller Springs Road, Carrollton, Texas. This is what the report says. When first viewed, the decedent is burned over a large portion of her body and is clad in a burned blue jean skirt, burned thin striped shirt with the word Red Bull, a burned white-brown belt with metallic braids, and panties, which were adhered to the inner aspect of the skirt. The hands and feet are bagged. Jewelry consisted of a white metallic ring with the words Con Carino and a heart design. This ring was on the right middle finger. On the right wrist is a black elastic or nylon bracelet, and the hair is clasped into an elastic cord. Now, going back to the photos for a minute, I have some from that night, and you can see what she was wearing, even down to the black elastic on her right wrist. There is more to this report, but I want to wait a minute to tell you all of the details of what occurred, because at this point, Detective Frade is getting in contact with the person whose number was dialed from the Quick Trip phone. It's a woman. Her name is Andrea. And she explained she was the ex-girlfriend of the man who made the call. And she finally says his name, Ernesto Reyes. The woman explains that Ernesto has had his fair share of bad luck the last few years, and bad luck translates to trouble with the law. But she stood by his side through all of that. However, recently she had enough, and they broke up. Then he was kicked out of his mother's house because he beat up his brother with a baseball bat. And she let him stay back at her place until the night before he was seen on that camera at that store. She told him he had to leave because he took her car without asking and he broke her cell phone. So when he made the call from the Quick Trip, he was desperately trying to find a ride and a place to stay. But she did not want him around, so she refused to help him. Now that they have a name, investigators run Ernesto Reyes through their system and they get a hit right away. He's a 20-year-old with theft and drug charges on his record. At this point in his life, Ernesto is out of work. He doesn't have a car, he doesn't have money, and he doesn't have any friends or family members that are willing to help him. Detectives look at where all of these things occurred and where he was from, and he was from Denton, Texas, so they want to know what he was doing in Carrollton. His ex-girlfriend explained he was actually there because one of his friends had recently moved out that way. His friend's name was Donovan Young. It hadn't even been a full 24 hours, like I told you. Investigators already had the name of the victim and the person that they know committed this crime, or they think they know. Now they had to track down Ernesto, but they get some bad news from his ex. She said that he left for Mexico. That's where his grandma was living. The border is only around 7 hours away driving, and I don't know if he drove or flew. I don't know if someone helped him or not, but detectives do confirm that he has entered Mexico, and this is very disheartening. They really don't want this dangerous guy to get away. But they still have one other lead, Donovan Young, so they call him in for questioning. What they hear when he is interrogated is frightening. Donovan doesn't hesitate. He also has a criminal record, and he doesn't want to make it longer. Remember how that officer found the Saturn parked in this apartment complex? Well, it turns out that was Donovan's place. But he tells investigators he had nothing to do with Melanie's murder. But after you hear what you're about to hear, what he says happens, you tell me what you think. Because you know, I love to read your theories, your thoughts, your opinions in the comments. I try to be here the first 2 hours after my video posts, and I know I'll see Charles Turner and Rachel Ray and Sarah Kenny and Justin Spletzer, hope I'm saying that right, Orlando Moda, and Tamika Davis. I'll see you there right away, and thank you so much for being the first to comment on like every single video. I notice. But going back, Donovan Young tells investigators that Ernesto shows up at his apartment at 3 a.m., knocking on the door, telling him something bad happened. He did something, and he needs help. Donovan says, being curious, he follows Ernesto out to a red Saturn that was parked outside, and he looked inside, and he could see a female in the back seat. She had a jean skirt on, and her panties were pulled down. Donovan said her eyes were open, but Ernesto tells him she's dead and that he killed her. What would you do? Because he asked Donovan for help. He needs to get rid of her. And Donovan tells investigators he told Ernesto he wanted nothing to do with this. But Ernesto was begging his friend for anything. He had nothing, and he was frantically trying to figure out what he was going to do. Donovan said Ernesto told him he needed gas money and a gas can. Donovan told investigators he ends up giving Ernesto a couple dollars and a gas can. So you tell me, if this is true, this alone is true, tell me, did this man have nothing to do with this crime? Because the detective is not buying the story, but it's all they have at this moment. But why would Donovan give Ernesto what he needs to cover up this crime if Donovan himself had nothing to do with it? Why didn't he call the police? If he had just seen his friend pull up with a dead body in the back of a car, why would he just go back inside and go to bed? Because that's what he says happens. He admits he regrets not calling the police. He probably chose to keep himself out of trouble. But this lack of action will leave the door open for Ernesto to tell his own version of events, ones that are very different from the way Donovan says that things happened. But they still don't have Ernesto in custody. However, they did have more evidence piling up in the form of additional video footage from 2 other stores. 1 hour after leaving the Quick Trip, Ernesto is caught on a camera at a Chevron, but it's closed. It's a gas station. He's trying to buy gas. The camera actually catches him in the parking lot. He pulls in backwards, probably trying to avoid anyone seeing Melanie in the back seat. He's also seen taking off his shirt and turning it inside out and then putting it back on after he looked at his reflection in the store window. Detectives believe he did this for one of 2 reasons. One, because there was blood visible on his shirt, or he was trying to disguise himself by appearing to be wearing a different shirt. Either way, he is clearly identified in this video. He leaves because he can't get gas, and another camera spots him at a 7-Eleven gas station nearby where he walks in with the red gas can in his hand, even places it down on the countertop where he buys $1.76 worth of gasoline. And that's all he needed to carry out what we already saw on that chilling video from the Transtech parking lot. But at the 7-Eleven, he's seen at the pump filling up the gas can, and he even asked a stranger if he could borrow their cell phone, just acting calmly like nothing happened. The last time we see Ernesto is when he lights Melanie's remains down in that embankment in Carrollton at 4:06 a.m. It would take the U.S. Marshals 2 weeks to track him down and finally extradite him back to Texas to stand trial for Melanie's murder. They found him at his grandmother's house, but by the time they got all the right documents and the authority to make an arrest, he was gone. But it didn't take long for them to spot him once again. But even though they were finally able to catch him, the only issue is that Mexico doesn't have capital punishment. So they would not allow Ernesto to be taken back to Texas unless prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty. And that was a tough decision because they fully intended to go that route. But they decided they would rather have him in prison for the rest of his life than to let him escape their grasp. The trial was 1.5 years after Melanie's murder. From piecing all the evidence together, the prosecutor and the investigative team believe that Melanie put up a fight for her life. As small as she was, she fought as hard as she could. And there's evidence that shows the most likely scenario is that she fought so hard that she was actually able to get away from Ernesto at one point and run. Reason being, her shoes were not found on her feet. They were not found in the car. They were gone. She ran so hard her shoes came off of her feet. But unfortunately, Ernesto was able to catch up. There is blood on the outside of the vehicle, which is another indication that she had gotten away from him at one point and was outside of her own vehicle. But they believe she was pulled back inside, and that is where he forced himself upon her. There was blood in the backseat of the vehicle, which was consistent with this theory of events. She had bruises and contusions on the front of her face, on her forehead, on the top of her head, on the back of her head, and those were caused from blunt force trauma, which means that she was hit or punched. Some type of force was used against her in those areas as she was trying to get away. There was a large mark on her chest. There was so much force applied to that area. And all of that unrelated to the actual strangulation that occurred. What they believe is that this was where Ernesto put his knee on top of her while he was carrying out the rest of his actions. He's applying that force to her neck while applying that knee to her chest. And remember that 90 minutes that was unaccounted for? Well, that 90 minutes was what the defense attorneys used to try to create reasonable doubt in Ernesto's case. They argued that there were no eyewitnesses. Nobody saw Ernesto carry out a murder, that all the evidence was circumstantial. Yes, they agree it was Ernesto on the camera at the convenience store. They don't argue against the footage of Ernesto even setting Melanie ablaze. But the defense says that Ernesto was forced to do that. He was forced by Donovan Young. That's right. Remember how I said that Ernesto would tell his own version of events? Well, there was no way his defense team was going to put him on the stand. They weren't going to open him up to cross-examination because I know from what you are about to hear, and they know from Ernesto's past, who he truly is. And he would have probably blown up in anger at the prosecution, and it would have ruined everything for him. Instead, they use sort of a loophole to introduce some evidence of Ernesto telling his story to a media outlet while he was incarcerated and waiting for trial. He had done an interview with Univision, partially in Spanish, and they played it for the jury with a translator explaining what Ernesto said. And I watched the whole thing, and I was physically sick to my stomach. Ernesto, while wearing the black and white striped prison jumpsuit, is on that handheld phone receiver speaking with a reporter through a pane of glass. He told the media he's not a killer. He never wanted to be, and he never has been, and he was just at the wrong place with the wrong people. It was Donovan who committed the crime, not him. He says he asked Melanie for a ride, and she said, "Where to?" And he told her he was headed to his friend's house. Ernesto says that Melanie said yes, she would take him there. But we know from the camera footage that she said no, and she repeated it. And she told Ali she was on her way home. She had a cold chocolate milk in hand, something she was bringing home to her boyfriend. It doesn't make sense that she would have agreed to take this detour with a stranger at 2 a.m., but it gets worse. Ernesto actually tells the media that Melanie was asking for trouble. It's victim blaming at its finest. He says after they get into Melanie's car, she wants drugs. So she asks Ernesto where they could get some. Really? That is insulting. He wanted to drag this poor woman down to his disgusting level. And later, he will literally drag her to her final resting place. He wanted everyone to believe that this innocent woman who stopped after a long night, standing on her feet for hours, promoting for Red Bull, who's kind enough to stop at the store to get her boyfriend some snacks, actually willingly gets into a car with this stranger and then proceeds to ask him for drugs. So what was it that he thought would make us believe it? Was it the short skirt? Was it the fact that she was out late? Did he just assume, like other disgusting monsters, that she was asking for this unwanted attention? No, she wasn't. She was just in the path of a heartless, cold-blooded killer. But he tells the media in this jailhouse interview that he told her he could get her some weed at his friend's house. So they arrive, and Donovan comes out with the weed. Ernesto says he jumps into the back seat while Melanie and Donovan smoke together and take pills in the front of the car. Really? Wow. And let me guess, did she wash them down with the chocolate milk that she bought for her boyfriend? Because it disgusts me that anyone would believe this story. And it gets even more ridiculous. He says all of a sudden a fight broke out and he didn't know what to do. Are you kidding me? He says, I don't know if they were serious or they were just like horse playing, but I was scared. I couldn't even listen to him. He made me so sick, and I won't put his voice or his version of these events on my channel because I'm not giving a killer a platform to speak. But he continues to say that he could tell Melanie was hurt, and he told Donovan he wanted out of the car, and as soon as he did that, Donovan pulled out a pistol and pointed it at him. Melanie's family, her close friends, her loved ones had to sit in that courtroom and listen to this garbage. Listening to this man cut her down and insinuate that she caused her own death by asking for trouble. Melanie's dad said that he sat in that courtroom praying that the jury would be able to see through this man's story, that they would know who Melanie truly was, the kind, loving, sweet girl who innocently walked into that convenience store and crossed paths with a monster. Ernesto went on to say that Donovan forced him to buy gasoline and that he was praying to God to help him because he thought Donovan was going to kill him and he had no choice but to get the gas. And it seems so absurd to me. Clearly, we only see Ernesto at the gas stations. Where was the threat? Where was Donovan? Yet the story continues. He says they went to some warehouse where Donovan told him to put the gas on Melanie while laughing and saying, "You do it, you do it." So he did it. Then when the reporter asked him how Melanie actually died, Ernesto said he was high on drugs. But from what he saw, it was just Donovan hitting her over and over again and then choking her. When I was watching this, all I kept doing was yelling, "No, Ernesto, it was you who did that to her." Donovan was indicted for tampering with evidence, and he took a deal in exchange for his testimony against Ernesto at trial. He bravely took the stand, although I do not see him as innocent in this crime. He does tell the jury what he told investigators, that the only thing he did was give Ernesto money for gas and a gas can, but did not murder Melanie. The prosecution had some damning evidence of their own from Melanie's own car. A car that they showed from pictures was clearly burned in an attempt to get rid of any evidence inside, but Ernesto failed. Donovan told the jury that Ernesto tried twice to blow up Melanie's car. 2 times. He tried putting a sock in the opening to the gas tank and set it on fire, thinking it would blow up the whole thing, but he was wrong. The windows were rolled up, and therefore the lack of oxygen made the fire go out. Remember how they found the sock and the gas cap in the apartment parking lot where Melanie's car was parked before it was moved? Well, the car was found not far from the Quick Trip. The inside was burned. The seats were burned, the door panels were burned, and there was accelerant inside and pieces of burnt paper as well. There was also a burn mark on the gas tank right here, where the sock would have been. Ernesto took his sock and the gas cap because he thought it would have his fingerprints or his DNA on it. I also spotted 2 empty Red Bull cans in her car, and it made me sad because I can imagine Melanie not having a clue what was going to happen to her that night. Donovan explained Ernesto got a ride back from him, from the scene where the car was burned. And I ask you, and I wish I could ask Donovan, because I didn't see this anywhere, where were you? Why were you able to pick up your friend that doesn't have a phone? So were you really in bed like you say you were after you merely gave him a couple bucks? Because something doesn't add up at all. How would Donovan know that his buddy needed a ride after 4 a.m. when he tried to burn the car, huh? Tell me. Unless he's psychic, he was there when that car was being burned. Why? Prosecutors introduced a digital camera into evidence. It's a camera that they found unharmed in Melanie's car. And on the memory card were a ton of pictures that she took, pictures of her life before this monster took it from her. She was smiling and laughing with her friends and hugging her dad on their last family vacation. These were pictures that proved what a vibrant and beautiful person Melanie truly was. The pictures spoke for themselves. They showed the jury how contradictory the picture Ernesto painted of Melanie truly was. But there was something else on that memory card. 2 pictures that Melanie didn't take. 2 pictures of Ernesto himself. Selfies that were shot by him after he burned Melanie's body. His face just coldly looking right into that camera lens while he's standing outside of Donovan's apartment complex. Ernesto is the one in all of these photos and footage. Where is Donovan? Well, Ernesto himself tried to answer that question to the media. In that interview, he actually has the audacity to say, I don't know. I don't know why Donovan was never caught on camera. I don't know why I'm the only one that was ever seen on camera, because Donovan, he was in the backseat the whole time. He was the one giving me orders. Well, prosecutors went one step further. They had DNA evidence that linked Ernesto to Melanie. It survived the fire. It was a vaginal swab that they conducted during her autopsy. His semen was found inside her body. But of course, the defense team has an argument, a reasonable explanation about why that DNA was there. And it's not one that anyone close to Melanie wanted to hear. I cringe thinking about her parents having to listen to this but they once again blamed this poor girl. The defense questioned the medical examiner and asked if there were any signs of force in the pubic area, and there were not. There was also no DNA, no skin under her fingernails, and therefore, just because there were no outward signs left behind of a struggle, the defense set forth the claim that Melanie consented to sex with Ernesto. No. No, 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 no. They're once again painting this poor girl in such a bad light. Well, to counter this argument, the prosecution calls Melanie's own mother to the stand, Peggy Goodwin. Prosecutor Andrea Hanley asked Peggy whether the daughter that she raised for the last 19 years would have done the things that Ernesto said she did. Drugs, consensual sex with him. And Peggy said, absolutely not. Absolutely not. She even said that we taught her not to accept rides from strangers, not to give strangers rides, and if she had to stop somewhere in the middle of the night, always do it at a well-lit, well-populated area, and that's what it seems like she did. She also gave a reason as to why there may not have been any signs of a struggle. It was because she was so tiny. I don't know if you remember the story I told you about when Melanie's older brother used to tickle her. He would grab both of her wrists with one of his hands. That's how small they were. Peggy was trying to show that Melanie was no match for someone as big as Ernesto. There was also no evidence of drugs in Melanie's system. So that argument, it was thrown out, at least by the jury, because they deliberated for only 3 hours before returning a verdict of guilty. But I'm not done. Just one more thing. Ernesto was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, and Donovan Young received 8 years for his involvement in the crime. But outside in that hallway after sentencing, unbelievably, Ernesto's mother and the Goodwins came face to face with one another. Nobody knew what to expect, but to everyone's surprise, the mothers embraced. Ernesto's mom told Peggy in her arms, sobbing, how sorry she was for what her son had done to their daughter. Peggy did not hesitate to embrace Ernesto's mother. They cried together, and this was captured on video. It was a very emotional moment. Melanie's dad then spoke to Ernesto's mom in Spanish, thanking her for apologizing. And when asked why they were so kind to the mother of a monster that killed their daughter, the Goodwins explained that they're human. They have compassion, and Melanie was the same way. Peggy said that she had looked over in Ernesto's mom's direction when they were playing the video of the fire, and she saw Ernesto's mother crying uncontrollably. Peggy was able to put herself in that mother's shoes. As hard as it was, she knew what her son had done, and she was sorry for it. And it had me teary-eyed watching that embrace. One of the jurors, named Amy, told the media that it was what was not caught on video that made her doubt Ernesto's story. They never saw Donovan, especially when that huge fireball filled up the screen. They watched that video numerous times, and when it lights up the entire car interior, and there's no one else inside. Okay, now I couldn't believe this, but I couldn't leave it out either. As much as I hate Ernesto, I look for facts, and after digging further into this case, I found a lawsuit that was brought by Melanie's family against the Quick Trip for wrongful death. In that case, more evidence had been discovered, and when the clerk, Chin, you remember he had testified at the other trial, he testified in this second trial, and he had some very interesting things to add about what he saw that night. Now, granted, in this second trial, he's on the side of Quick Trip, and he's their witness to prove that the act did not occur on the premises, but it took place elsewhere. So take this how you will, but it is still evidence in a court of law and was presented at trial. It turns out that police had initially believed Melanie was abducted. However, there is evidence to the contrary. As Melanie is leaving the store, she is heard on camera saying, "Pretty normal." She appeared to be on the phone with her boyfriend. However, remember that Ali stated at Ernesto's trial that she never told him she was planning on giving Ernesto a ride. Quick Trip was offering this phrase as evidence of Melanie telling someone, at least that someone was either pretty normal or that something was pretty normal, insinuating that she might have been on the phone with her boyfriend saying, "I might give this guy a ride," And maybe someone said, well, what is he like? And she could have said, pretty normal. But she could have been referring to anything we don't know. But there's more. The clerk testified, and when he was questioned about the events of that night, he admitted that Melanie, although seemingly reluctant to give Ernesto a ride at first, he watched Melanie and Ernesto walk towards Melanie's car. She went to the driver's side, and Ernesto was kind of in front of the car at first, and then at one point, they drive away together. To Chin, the clerk, it looked as though Melanie had decided to give Ernesto a ride after all. Plus, before the car leaves that parking lot, Melanie's phone records show a call was made from her phone to one of Ernesto's friends, presumably Donovan. That information was not provided in this second trial. They did not name said friend. But this shows that Melanie indeed might have done both. Agreed to give Ernesto a ride and let him use her phone, because the video shows Ernesto going to the passenger side of the car, and there was no struggle caught on video at that point when the car left the parking lot. It doesn't change what happened. Ernesto killed Melanie. We don't know what happened after they left Quick Trip, but we know Melanie did not ask for what happened to her, even if she may have had compassion and agreed to give Ernesto a ride home. I know that in my heart, and the jury has spoken. They know more evidence than I did because they were in that courtroom. In closing, I found a Facebook page honoring Melanie and her life. Her mom, Peggy, is one of the admins, although it was created by one of Melanie's friends. And actually, Peggy was pretty reluctant to interact with people on there at first, but now she's on there all the time, keeping her daughter's memory alive. Sadly, the Goodwin family experienced yet another tragedy in 2016, I believe. Their surviving daughter, Candace, Melanie's older sister, was in a horrific motorcycle accident. Her helmet came off, and she suffered a traumatic brain injury. Peggy said that she came home from the hospital in diapers, and she was mentally a 3-year-old. But the family did everything they could, and after 4 years of treatment, they experienced what Peggy referred to as miracles, because Candace is now independent, she can drive, she got married, and she has a precious baby boy. I just want to say that I am so sorry to this family. They've been through so much and they remain so strong. And if you want to join the Facebook group, I have a link in my description box. There's so many precious comments that are made by close friends and family about who Melanie Therese Goodwin was. She was an amazing human being that was taken way too soon. I want to thank you so much for being here and listening to Melanie's story. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.